There's no really need for any introduction. And I think we saw his story, and I think everybody pretty much knows his story, so I'm just going to shut up and give you Mr. Travis Walton, who's here from Arizona, not from Arkansas. My mistake.
Thank you for that welcome. They asked me to, as much as possible, go back and recount again what happened in 1975. Doesn't matter how many times I've told it, it still affects me in a personal way. Right off the bat, I would like to explain the term fire in the sky, where that came from. At the time that we first saw the glow coming through the trees, we thought it might be a forest fire. This had happened before. We were on our way to work. Lightning had struck a tree high up above the ground, and we stopped and put the fire out. And it wasn't that unusual for us to fight fire. Very often the Forest Service would come and get us. We're a crew there with experience and tools, and so they had recruited us to fight forest fire at times. So seeing the glow through the trees, that was one possibility we thought of what the source of this light might be. It was deer hunting season. I was thinking possibly deer hunters camped up there, but nothing that we could think of was fitting in with what this might be, because the light was coming from higher than where ground level would be. The sun had already set. It wasn't the sunset. The moon was in a different direction. We could see that over in the different direction. One explanation that the debunkers come up with right away is the planet Jupiter. Can you believe that? This was not some tiny little point of light off in the sky, but this is supposed to move the picture forward, but it's not working right now.
Wait a minute. There we go.
Trying the right button. Need sound effects.
I'm hitting the right arrow, it's just not doing it.
Really? This one? This one. It says page on, that one.
Page down is what that is, okay.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Can you move this microphone down a little, just over a little? It's like putting. Yeah, let's try that.
Okay.
This thing in your face.
I used to have to explain that, yes, there are forests in Arizona. It's not all cactus and desert. But, yeah, I live up in the, on the Mogollon Rim area. And one reason that we had encountered lightning-caused fires is because the Mogollon Rim area there has the second highest frequency of lightning strikes of any place in the continental United States. The only one that has more frequent lightning is the Everglades. And when lightning hits there, it hits water. It's probably pretty exciting for alligators, but that becomes much more significant in trying to figure out what were they doing there, After this event happened, we went through every possibility in trying to research the area. Underground water, underground mineral deposits, et cetera, et cetera. But the frequency of lightning strikes figures into this in more ways than one. Most of the weather comes out of the southwest, and as the air rises up, hits that increase in elevation, get a lot of precipitation, which makes for the wetter climate up there. In the movie, there were only 5 of us, but there were actually 7 of us out there. Also in the movie, it makes it look like we had been driving for some time and had gotten drowsy and were sleepy. But the truth is, we had just been doing some very hard physical labor. We were about as alert state of mind as you could possibly get. And the idea that we'd had a beer after work or some other such thing is no way. This is not a kind of work that you can do and be impaired in any way, or you're going to get yourself seriously injured. It is, you know, a very dangerous kind of work, and every one of the crew had experienced some kind of chainsaw injury in the course of doing the job. And that was one theory that law enforcement had about the disappearance of Travis Walton. I could see the light coming across the road ahead, so I knew there was a break in the trees. You know, it was pretty thick between us and the glow. So I said, Mike, hurry up, get up there where we can see what it is. It wasn't anything I said with extreme anxiety or anything, because, you know, I was thinking it might be a deer hunter's camp there or something. You know, it just didn't seem like anything to be alarmed about at that point. But when we finally got up there to where that break in the trees was, there's the truck. That's how 7 of us were all in one truck. And as soon as we got to where that light was shining across the road, boom, there it was. You know, it probably as close as from here to the back of the room, or not much farther than that. And Alan yelled out, "It's a flying saucer!" I mean, there was no doubt. Nobody needed to say what it was. It was incredible. Definitely not the planet Jupiter. You know, the first thing the debunkers do is they look at the astronomical charts and go, must be that, you know. And it was ridiculous. But I threw open the door and headed towards it, thinking that it would take off before I got very far at all. It was kind of a standard procedure when you catch sight of a bear, a mountain lion, or something like that. You're lucky if the rest of the crew can even look in that direction before it's gone. So that was what I was thinking when I first got out, and I headed towards it. Now, later, Alan was interviewed. He's no longer with us, but he's on videotape saying that to him, it looked like I was in some kind of a trance, like I was being drawn towards it hypnotically, you know. I would say I was entranced, but, you know, turn around and look at those guys' faces, I'd say they were pretty entranced too. It was, wow, you know, it was just a stunned look on everybody's face. But I think Steve favored that hypnotic control theory, because people would ask him, how come you didn't get out? And, you know, he was embarrassed, you know. I guess he thought he should have got out. I think he was the smart one, you know. But so Steve had a theory that, you know, I was more susceptible to their mind control than the rest of them. But, you know, here the other day, somebody come up with a suggestion. You know, you can tell Steve that they were the ones that were susceptible to mind control, because the aliens were making them stay in the truck. But to me, it felt like my own idea, you know. Felt like just kind of an impulsive, sort of rash thing I was doing. And but Steve says, well, if they have mind control, they can make you think it's your idea. So, you know, how do you argue with that? Well, whatever. To me, it seemed like my idea. I got out, went closer to it, and The closer I got, the scarier they got, the scarier I got. So I slowed down, and they were pretty much, by the time that, just like in that little clip that you saw earlier, that was done fairly accurately for Hollywood. They were, swearing at me to get back in the truck, get in the truck so we can get the heck out of here, Well, I was standing there looking up at it at like about out of 45, just about what this picture here would be, you can see the surface is reflective, but giving off a glow at the same time. It's kind of like when you're watching television and you can see the picture on the screen, but you can see whatever's coming in the window reflected off the television. So you're kind of seeing both at the same time. But it was kind of had this perfection and this awesomeness to it that, all the guys in the crew commented about that. And I was looking up at it, and the sound it was making was a mixture of highs and lows, right off the range of human hearing on the high end and the low end. The guys in the truck said you could kind of feel some kind of a vibration in the truck, that it was a powerful sort of a feeling that was just spread through the whole area. It wasn't just the sound, it was the glow. The glow had a sort of an ethereal sort of a strangeness to it lit up everything in the clearing in this weird kind of way. But I didn't have too much time to contemplate that, when it suddenly got louder and started to move away from me. So I just reflexively jumped into a crouch. I jumped down behind a log that was sticking up there, and they were screaming at me, "Get in the truck, get in there, let's go, let's go." And I didn't need to be told. So I stood up to go back to the truck, and before I could run, bam, I just felt the stunning force hit me. And it was like a physical blow in the way it felt, but I didn't actually see the blast of energy. I just felt it. And they said that Steve said it got him. And in his vocabulary, that meant it killed him because it was that violent. They said it was like I stepped on a landmine, like a grenade had gone off. Threw me 15 or 20 feet. John said my body landed like there wasn't a bone in my body, like a sack of meat. And so it was perfectly reasonable for them to conclude that I was dead. That's what they said. They were saying to each other, he's dead, let's go, let's go. So years ago, a number of talks I gave, people would stand up and condemn the crew for their actions, that they were cowardly, that they didn't stand their ground, that, they didn't try to rescue me at that point. And that doesn't make sense to me. Mike was responsible for the safety of the entire crew, and at that point, the smartest thing to do was to get the hell out of there. They said they were screaming, "Let's go, let's get the hell out of here." Mike said he almost wrecked the truck, crashing through the woods to get away from there. They said they paused and were arguing about what to do when they saw deer hunters go by on the rim road, which is just a little farther up. And the rim road kind of parallels the border of the Apache Indian reservation there. And they said they went and tried to catch up with the deer hunters, thinking, even at that point, Mike was thinking, we got to go back and see if we can help. We're not certain he's dead, so we got to make sure of that. As frightening as that possibility is, they were, at least Mike was thinking he was going to do that. But in discussions with the crew, they were unable to catch up with the deer hunters. Mike pulled over and said, "Look, we got to go back. We got to see if he's hurt or if we can help him." And in the movie, the discussion about when Mike said made the offer, anybody who doesn't want to go can just wait here for us, and we'll pick you up when we come back. In the movie, everybody volunteered to wait in the dark all by themselves. Not real plausible to me. It was much safer just to stay in the truck, and that's what really happened. The entire crew opted to return with Mike to see if they could help me. And I give those guys a tremendous amount of credit for having the courage to do that. On the way back, Kenny, they saw it take off, and apparently some other people in the area, deer hunters or campers or something, reported it to the sheriff, seeing it leaving the area. And so Kenny said he wasn't so frightened about the idea of it coming back, but what my body was going to look like. Was it going to be charred? Was it going to be something burned up and horrible to look at? And Steve was even arguing that was I even in one piece when I hit the ground? But they said they came back. In the movie, they made it look like they weren't certain of where it was that we'd stopped and seen it, but there was no doubt about that, because when Mike took off, he revved that motor up and popped the clutch out, and it dug holes in the dirt road there, so they knew where it was. And Mike said he could see my footprints going up into the clearing. And they said they, made a search looking to see if I'd crawl off in the distance. And at one point, Kenny said that Mike just broke down and fell to his knees and was crying. And when they returned to town, Mike wasn't the only one that looked like they'd been crying. When the sheriff's men came and encountered these guys, they definitely looked extremely emotionally traumatized, and so the immediate suspicion, them being law enforcement people, was that this crazy story is not what happened. There was some sort of a fight, and Travis was killed, and they got to come up with some kind of a explanation for his disappearance. Well, I can think of a whole lot of other ways that they could have explained a man's disappearance in the woods. You go over the hill, use the restroom, and you never come back. Who knows? A bear got you, a mountain lion, or whatever. Maybe you just wandered off and got lost. There's a whole lot of explanations they could have used that would have been less suspicious than saying that a flying saucer came down and took a friend away to outer space. James Garner. Oh, by the way, James Garner on the set of the movie called me aside and he says, I kind of regret playing the part of the skeptical sheriff here because, I really do believe you guys, And I thought that was cool that he would make a point of saying that. But I went to a film festival where the Travis film that Jennifer made was being shown. And James Garner's daughter, he only has one offspring, Gigi. And she made a point of coming to that film festival just to inform me that her father really did believe us. And I thought that was really touching that she would go out of her way after he had passed away to let us know that that he sort of regretted playing the part of the skeptic. But the real life Sheriff Gillespie was kind of the same way. he was posturing as a big skeptic to his cowboy cohorts. His social circle was a bunch of, as Steve calls them, rednecks, you know. And the most popular point of view there was, yeah, we want to be like James Garner, because James Garner was kind of a Western hero to these guys. You know, they grew up seeing James Garner in various cowboy roles, you know, playing the part of the sheriff. And so it's kind of ironic that, you know, the sheriff really liked the idea that he was being played by James Garner, so he was trying to live up to the standard that James Garner was as a skeptic, when in real life, privately, he was a believer. But by the same token, Sheriff Gillespie's friends and relatives were privately telling me that he really does believe you. He just doesn't want to say that in public. You know, he's an elected official, and he's really proud of the skeptical role. So if you get the Travis film, you'll notice that the sheriff finally admits on camera. I don't know if he ever said it any other place, because his friends and relatives emailed me about it, but he said, well, you know, they were trying to tell the truth, I think is his words, but basically, you know, his friends and family were saying that he was a believer. As a matter of fact, the night that it happened, he confided in the crew that he'd had his own sighting right there in the county while on duty as sheriff, you know. So back in those days, it was not something you could just admit to, but it is much more common, and from law enforcement type sources. I have encountered a few police officers in the area, patrolmen and whatnot, and they being people who, it's part of their job to keep their eyes peeled, and they're out late at night and they see things. You'd be surprised how many police officers are confiding to me that they've seen things they definitely believe to be UFOs. But that blast of energy in the last year has got a little bit better explanation. You know, like I was saying, back in the day, we were looking for you know, underground water, minerals deposits. So, you know, what could they have been doing there? Well, this lightning strike thing comes into play now. That last year, Rob Lowe came and did an interview, and he had a show with his two sons called The Lowe Files, and it was a two-parter. My segment was first, and then he was introducing this lady that does crystals at gem shows, and he was saying, well, Travis told me that the aliens were in that area looking for fulgurite. And I go, huh? I never said that. I didn't know what fulgurite was. So I had to go online and look it up, and found out that fulgurite is a substance that's formed when lightning strikes the earth. You got millions of volts and millions of degrees, and it forms crystals, substances that are not formed geologically. And the crystal lady in the next segment was talking about the strange properties that these crystals have, that they're unique, and that a very special thing that might be much harder to find than other kinds of minerals that you could maybe gather anywhere else in the universe. But here on the rim, where the highest frequency of lightning in the United States, outside the Everglades. And finally, you know, that was a plausible explanation for what they were doing in that area. couple of months ago, I saw a lightning bolt come out of a clear blue sky. And I go, oh yeah, that can happen. I heard about that, you know, that especially when you have something like the spacecraft, which might have a sort of a magnetic distortion in the area, some kind of an EMF distortion to where it could actually attract a lightning strike. And then a secondary leap from the craft to ground by way of me created an accidental injury that at that point they intervened to repair the damage. And I'm thinking perhaps that's the reason it took so long, why they kept me that long. So, you know, the term abduction has been used a lot, but it might not be accurate. I said maybe it was more of an ambulance call than an abduction. I was extremely concerned about possible ill effects on health. My brother was, that was his number one mission from the time he collected me, was to get me out of there. You know, it was a madhouse in the area. You know, there was just media barrage. You could hardly function. So he wanted to get me out of there. He felt like if law enforcement was to get their hands on me, they would not have any respect for the fragility of my condition. You know, I was hanging by a thread. So he took me to Phoenix because during the search, some UFO researchers had assured him that they had people in their membership who could, you know, better handle the situation and know what to look for and you know. So the first thing he did was take me to this Dr. Stewart. Turned out to be nothing like what was promised. The guy was not even a real doctor. He had some kind of a diploma from some kind of diploma mill. But so we left there, and after, you know, they had been bragging to the media that they had the case and they were going to research it, they switched to attacking and claiming the reason that we left was because this guy was a drug expert and that we were afraid that they were going to see that I was hallucinating on drugs. But that whole issue was thoroughly covered with blood and urine samples that were put through the Maricopa County medical examiner's drug screen. Showed no trace of any drug of any kind in my body. And this whole theory that, you know, 7 people are going to have identical hallucinations is just absurd, you know. Nobody hallucinates identically. There was another theory, Dr. Michael Persinger. I just saw online where Dr. Michael Persinger passed away last night, but he had a theory that because the Mogollon Rim is a giant fault line, that there was some kind of plate tectonics, some sort of earthquake lights type of lightning from the ground coming up through me that might have caused an hallucination. But again, all these hallucination explanations do not take into account that 7 people saw the same thing. It just doesn't happen, you know. And never mind that other campers and hunters, fishermen in the area saw it, and physical evidence at the site. The ufologists came in, they had Gauss meters, 2 different models, that they charted out the clearing where the craft came down, and there was strong magnetic readings with a polarity reversal in the direction that the craft had departed. And there was Geiger counter readings from a guy that was really reluctant to even be measuring it. He thought the whole thing was just a big a bunch of baloney, and what am I wasting my time in making Geiger counter readings here? But he was basically getting a 1.5 reading everywhere in the clearing there. And so Mike said, well, test us, and there was no change there. And so, Mike asked, okay, maybe it's not working properly, and he said no, and he held it up to a radium dial watch, and the reading was 3, which is double background radiation on a radium dial watch, which really is not that great, but when he tested the men, he got no change. But Mike said, look, we've bathed and changed our clothes. Let me go get the hard hats out of the truck. So he went over there and got the hard hats, and they got a reading of 6, which was double a radium dial watch. And at that point, the guy got angry and refused to even talk to him any longer. But hard to say, where that line of research went. There was a lady from the local radio station, a media person that had been a reporter with the newspaper too. She had been doing volunteer work in the local fire watchtowers, and she said that there was a group of federal employees come by making readings on the ground. Now, normally, when they're charting out magnetic readings, it's done with an instrument suspended in an airplane, and they fly along in a crisscross pattern like that. But they were doing this on the ground right after it happened, and I thought that was kind of interesting. But this whole thing with the fulgurite thing was particularly interesting to me, because it was finally an explanation for what they might be doing there. But there was one other thing concerned evidence at the site, and that is the change in the growth of the trees. I'm going to go ahead and get to this part about the, this is the service station. At the point that this picture was taken, it was no longer in business, but the night that it happened, this was where the crew met the sheriff. Well, there was some guy on the internet claiming that he had the whole inside story. He was the sheriff's nephew, and he was going to expose all this stuff. And he was saying that the crew met with the sheriff at the Red Robin Diner. Well, the Red Robin Diner did not exist for another 20 years. This was 1975, and the Red Robin Diner was founded in 1995. So he's coming out with all this expert about drug tests and all this stupid stuff. It was just totally made up. None of it was fitting with the facts of the case. But the people online jumped in before I ever even heard about it, and they said, no, there's no Red Robin Diner in that town at all. And he said, well, I meant the Red Onion. Well, there is a Red Onion, but it too was founded in 1995, 20 years after. This was where the crew met with the sheriff, initially with Deputy Chuck Ellison, who came to one of my conferences here a couple of years ago, and he turned out to be, a very interesting witness, because he was testifying the emotional condition that they were in. He was the first one to see the crew freshly after it happened, and in his years in law enforcement came to experience his own sightings over the years. So there it is. That service station has been torn down last year. But anyway, the point being, it's not the Red Robin Diner. Sheriff Gillespie You know, people feel like I ought to feel a lot of animosity towards him, but the truth is, you know, he was a man of integrity. He really was trying to do his best to investigate this thing objectively. I'll tell you a little story that happened back when I was a wild teenager. I got a ticket for speeding or loud pipes or something. And so I came to appear for my ticket, and there was nobody there. So I sat on the porch of the courthouse there in Snowflake, and nobody showed up. Half an hour later, I went home. So the next day, I'm walking down the street, and town marshal picks me up and arrests me, throws me in jail, you know, for failure to appear. It was really just an excuse to search me. Of course, he found nothing, but, you know, that was the attitude. And this was long before the UFO incident, understand. And so, so he throws me in jail, doesn't inform my mother at all. I'm a minor. I'm in high school, you know, this is ridiculous, you know. And so there's no place to sit down. You know, there's only a bed, and it's soaking wet. And the sink is torn off the wall. This place is a mess. So it's a crackerjack jail. I broke out, and I went down, and I turned myself in to Sheriff Gillespie. And so he calls his deputy, Woody Peterson, and says, come get him. He comes up there, and Woody walks in there. Yeah, we got us a real wild one here. Tore up our jail, tore the sink off the wall. Woody stands up and says, Sheriff Gillespie stands up and says, Woody, don't you lie to me. I was down there last week, and that sink was torn off the wall then. Oh, Woody got real red in the face and dropped that one. So he took me back to Snowflake, basically just let me go, dropped all the charges, because they knew they were just totally in the wrong. And but that was an example of Sheriff Gillespie standing up for what was right, you know, against his own deputy. So I give him a tremendous amount of credit for that. Took a lot of guts. The search, massive manhunt, you know, helicopters, airplanes, men on horseback, men on foot. They systematically searched the whole area, and the men were saying, look, we did not kill him. We did not kill him, and over again. My one brother, Dwayne, basically believed the crew, and my oldest brother, Don, initially didn't. He was accusing them of murdering me too, and threatening them if they had done any harm to me. But they were saying, look, we did not kill him. You know, John describes walking down the street and having people yell out stuff, you know, murderer, you know, where'd you hide the body? And they were getting that kind of flack during the whole search. So they volunteered to take sodium pentothal, polygraph test, anything they want. So the sheriff brought in the state police polygraph examiner, Cy Gilson, and he tested the men. Now, initially it was publicized that Alan Dallas had an inconclusive. He got in a big argument with the examiner and just stomped out. He actually pulled all the sensors off. See, what the problem was, the line of questioning was, have you ever wanted to do any harm to Travis Walton? Well, a few days before, he and I had got in a fight, you know, and he'd lost, you know, but so he had all kinds of feelings he's not going to be able to lie about, and he's going to get nailed for a murder that he didn't commit, because at that point I had not been found. And so Alan later took a complete test from the same state polygraph expert. It was actually like several years later, and he was even more experienced at the time. And Dr. Harder was with the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization at the time, and he made the point that if you had 6 witnesses testifying that they had witnessed a murder, even without polygraphs, that'd be an open and shut case in a death penalty case. And now, just because we're talking about seeing a UFO, people are, oh, I don't know about that, you know. It was a shift in the standards, to say the least. Anyway, when I was hit by that energy, I don't know how much time elapsed. I came to, but real gradually, and I was kind of like in and out of consciousness, and a lot of pain. I think the pain had to do with me passing back out. It was extreme, and it also felt like something was seriously wrong, like I was mortally wounded. There was something wrong inside. But so I was afraid to move too much. I could hear the sounds of people moving in the room. There was a light above me, looking straight up above me. I could tell because of the closeness of the ceiling that I was on some kind of a raised surface. I actually thought I was in some kind of hospital that. Because of the pain and this feeling of being wounded and the feeling of suffocation, I just guessed that somehow, you know, because I remembered seeing the craft and turning to run, that maybe I'd gotten hurt in the process of running away, you know, and so. My first, at first I couldn't focus my eyes. It was all blurry, and I was in and out. And this feeling that something was really wrong inside was my primary concern. And you know, something that Chase said earlier about the level of fear. You know, I always have to explain that because so many people think, well, if I was there and that happened to me, I would just stay calm, ask good questions, slip a souvenir in my back pocket, you know. But it's really hard to explain the level of fear that I experienced. And the feeling of suffocation adds an element beyond the feeling that I was injured. There was something like I was dying, you know, something really, really wrong with me, and I compared it to waterboarding. It's an interrogation technique that the people who undergo this know full well it's not going to kill them. They've heard about it before they ever are subjected to it. They actually practice it. They train for it. Our guys train for it. So, you know, the idea that it got branded torture is not real accurate because, you know, if we can, you know, train our own men, put them through it, just so that they'll be able to resist it better, you know, when the enemy applies it to them. Even though they know it's not going to kill them, it works. It still works because there's no fear like the fear of suffocation. So that's the analogy I make about, you know, why I was in such total panic. And, you know, that level of fear was actually there to some degree before I focused my eyes. When I could focus my eyes, I saw these creatures standing over me. And, you know, what was in the blurry vision before I could focus my eyes, I mistook being maybe doctors with a surgical cap and mask on and just, you know, this dark area of their eyes showing. You know, I very quickly saw that was not the case, that these creatures were right there up close. And I tried to lash out. It took all my strength to even move my arm, and it was really more of a push than a hit, because when it contacted its chest, it fell back very easily into the other one. I rolled in the other direction. They had this device across my chest, whether it was some sort of diagnostic device or immobilizing device or some kind of treatment, I don't know. But I was mainly focused on them because I considered them to be the primary threat here. I was associating with this pain, this feeling of injury with these beings that I was seeing. Now, in hindsight, you know, I probably wasn't correct. I was associating the fear of the strangeness of these beings with what was wrong inside me. And as it turns out, you know, the way I was returned and all that, that probably wasn't the case. But, you know, I can talk more about the level of fear and how, you know, it all figures into some of the things that Chase was talking about with the black triangle thing. They came, they seemed to be moving towards me at first, and they were like expressionless. And in so many cases, you know, they didn't have the term grays back then, but, you know, these beings are called grays now. And people describe them as being biological robots, incapable of emotion. But, you know, this last couple of years, I come to the insight that if you were a species that had been telepathic for who knows how long, maybe hundreds of years, thousands of years, facial expression is going to become obsolete. They don't need to smile, they don't need to frown, they're expressionless. So we think of them as robotic, when actually between themselves, the communication is acutely intense. They can communicate every level of emotion to each other, and they don't need to smile, they don't need, you know, they're actually saying things to each other telepathically much more intensely than what in our primitive way, you know, we do with smiles and frowns and such things as that. So, or even vocally. I mean, if they're telepathic, they don't even need to, you know, put a kind of a growl in their voice or, you know, a light tone in their voice. All that is telepathic on a whole different level. I had a medical doctor in one of my audiences that was commenting, and he was saying, you know, the largest opening in the front of the skull is the eye sockets, and if this stare that they were you know, doing to you has something to do with their ability to project thoughts or assert some sort of calming effect, or, you know, it's some kind of an attempt to get me back on that table, anesthetized, so that whatever was going on could be completed. At the time, to me, it seemed horrible. This was just some kind of barbaric experiment of some kind, you know, what does pain do to humans, or something, you know, more terrible than that, unimaginable. But it turns out, in hindsight, that perhaps their motives weren't so negative at all, you know, that they were trying to accomplish something that probably no earthly medical team could have done, that to recover from that blast of energy at that level is, you know, had the crew been able to retrieve my body and take me to either Payson or Sholo Hospital, each about an hour away, it would have been too late. So in a way, it was fortunate that they took me and not the crew. In hindsight, took me years to overcome the prejudice in my own mind that this was horrific, that these staring eyes in my nightmares had nothing to do with this terrifying, experience, but was actually them just trying to reassert control in a way where they could get me back under and do some repairs. So the beings that were brought in, the human-looking being, various people have theorized that this was some kind of synthetic creation by these smaller creatures, that they surmised that there was no way I was going to cooperate with them, and it wasn't working. This telepathic mind control thing wasn't working because of this blast of energy that hit me in the head and chest. And in support of that theory was one of the medical tests that I underwent when I was returned. Dr. Kandel knew better than to try to put me into an MRI, EEG, and tell people who I was, because there was such hysteria that we were being hounded. The media was just pounding on the door, and the phone was ringing constantly. At my brother's house, and my mother's house, at the sheriff's department, it was a madhouse. And even when we were in the parking lot of the doctor's office, people said, "There he is," and they actually chased us through traffic. It was crazy how what a hysteria was going on. And so Dr. Kandel put me in to Barrows Neurological, world famous brain trauma center, to do an EEG without telling the technician who I was. So that was actually better science because of the what they call double blinding. If the technician doesn't know what he's looking for, then his own bias is not going to cause him to see something that's not there. So basically, the technician was looking for signs of brain trauma, and he found it. I have that MRI from that initial scan that happened right after it happened, and an EEG that occurred years later where that had disappeared. So that was just some sort of vestiges of the original injury that was preventing these beings from asserting this telepathic control over me. So they had to come up with something I was going to trust, something that looked more like me. Now, some people think they were like robots, some people they were like, figments of my imagination, some sort of creation that they had whipped up. I don't know. I took them to be humans at first. I just thought it was some sort of Air Force or military or NASA type beings that were there to rescue me. And, because I was just so terrified of these little creatures. And it was more to it than that. It was, the stare was accompanied with this squirmy feeling in my head. It was a very excruciating sort of, it was very uncomfortable. I think they were attempting to reassert control for my own good, and it wasn't working. Anyway, my nightmares, that stare, took a long time to get over that whole thing. Later on, I figured out that, my suppositions about opening a door and escaping would not have been possible based on the layout But I was in just a blind panic to get out of there any way I could until I was taken out by this human-looking individual. And, you know, if you were to see this guy, you would understand that I would assume he was human, you know, from the look of him. And until I saw him with others of his kind and saw the similarity in the group, you know, there was nothing that unusual about him at first. But whether that was some Earth-based agency that was summoned to help them in this situation, whatever, I don't know. I think there was, you know, some people say, you know, the odds of there being even a humanoid look, even these grays, the skeptics say, no way is an alien going to look anything remotely like 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head on top. They're going to look like a giant cockroach or an octopus or something. And that's not the case. If you understand biology, and I've had decades to think about this, form follows function. That's one of the basic biological rules. And there are creatures right here on this planet that illustrate that principle. The Australian sugar glider and the American flying squirrel are separated biologically by a tremendous distance. You know, the sugar glider is actually a marsupial, and the American flying squirrel is a rodent, and yet they resemble each other so much because of a similar lifestyle that requires them to be similar. Very large eyes because they're nocturnal. These big flaps of skin between the front and back legs that allows them to glide from tree to tree, so they don't have to go to the ground where they're vulnerable to predators, and so they can live at night and basically eat things from the trees and you know, live a similar lifestyle. So they come to resemble each other very closely because of a similar lifestyle, even though they're unrelated, and they didn't get their similar appearance from being descended from each other or related to each other in any way. And there's a number of other species here on the earth that I could point to. The American pronghorn is not even a true antelope, and its resemblance to an antelope in Africa is amazing. But they both came about in the presence of cheetahs. A very fast cat. There was actually an American cheetah that's now extinct, but the American pronghorn can actually run every bit as fast as the African antelope or African cheetah, and I've seen this firsthand. Mike and I were a whole crew of guys headed out that same road on the way to this contract where we were, and there was some antelope in the road, and they kind of made the mistake of running down the road instead of off to the side, and so they moved into an area where the trees were very thick on either side, and at that speed, no way they could get off the road. So I said, Mike, let's just see how fast they'll go. And he got the car up to, it wasn't a crew cab, a truck at this time. It was his car that we were using for a crew truck. And we got it up to 70 miles an hour for a quarter of a mile. And those 2 antelopes stayed right off the front of that bumper. They couldn't go any faster, but that's definitely faster than the recorded speed of the African cheetah, because the African cheetah is good for maybe 100 yards and they're out of gas, you know, but these antelope kept it up for a quarter of a mile. And so they have that leftover speed from the days when there was an American cheetah. And, you know, I could go on and on about other animals on the earth that have very similar attributes, even though they're not related, because the demands of their lifestyle and survival are very similar. And, you know, anything that's going to be a tool-using type of animal, intelligent, space traveling, all that kind of stuff, I would say, I would wager, and mark my words, they're all going to be basically humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, eyes in front. There's going to be quite a bit of variation, you know, like the Star Wars bar scene or something, you know. Hollywood, it's all kind of a man in a suit kind of a thing, but that works just fine with the idea that basically the basic humanoid form is the destiny of intelligence in the universe. Just my personal theory, you know. This human-looking guy took me out of this craft. Now, I don't know if it was parked there the whole time or if it had somehow been moved in there in the meantime. I was thinking that all I had to do was open a door and drop to the ground. I'd be back in the woods and rejoin my crew, and who knows, it was probably days later and they were long gone. But that's my confused thinking, because of my panic and fear, led me to, you know, conclude a lot of things that weren't accurate. When they took me out of this one craft, there were other craft that were shinier and more rounded, but I was mainly paying attention to where he was taking me. I was very concerned about that, and the fact that he wasn't answering my question was causing this growing and growing uneasiness about, you know, was I rescued at all? Why was he wearing a helmet? You know, that's something to worry about. So he took me down this, through these doors, and there were some other people dressed similar to him, except no helmets. So I started over with them, talking, you know, trying to get them to answer my questions about, there was a male and a female, and, you know, what were they doing with me, you know, and I expected, without the helmet, to get some answers that, you know, maybe he couldn't hear me with that on, maybe he couldn't talk with it on, but there was no excuse for these 2 people to not reply. But they were trying to get me to come with them, lay down on this table. You know, it took me years to figure out that it was probably for my own good, you know, that if they could get me back under anesthesia, so to speak, you know, that the rescue could continue. Well, I was still in a pretty weakened condition. When they wouldn't answer me, I started to fight back, to resist, but they fairly easily overcame me. They were stronger than I was, and I was in great shape at the time, and they produced this mask, some sort of a gas mask, and I lost consciousness. I wasn't aware of anything. I don't know how much time went by. I woke up and there was a light above. I looked to see where the light was coming from, but it went off before I could actually look in that direction. And it was there for just an instant before it shot up into the sky. And it was not making the sound that the craft in the woods was making. It was powerful. You know, when it shot up, it moved the air in a dramatic fashion, you know, but it was very quickly lost from sight, silently. The tree nearest where this thing went up is something I want to do some follow-up research on, because of the the changes in the growth of the trees at the site that we discovered. Came back there in early 90s, and we're doing an interview for, it was hard copy or something edition or something like that at the time. And because the movie was about to be released, so I guess it would have been probably 92 or 93. But they were so determined to get an interview on the site that they were going to get there come hell or high water. So they actually rented these giant snowcats. They got big metal treads about 5 feet across that can just go over the top of snowdrifts. So we got out there that way, did the interview on the site, and then left. But I found out later that Mike was very intrigued by the fact that the difficulty in finding the site didn't have to do with how much snow there was on the ground and how everything looked different, with snow all over the trees and everything. He actually noticed that the trees nearest where the craft came down were much bigger than they should have been. He never said a word to me, but he went out there and investigated this, I found out later, and discovered that there was thickened growth rings. You could count back, this was 15 years after the incident, and counting the growth rings back, you could see that they had suddenly got very much thicker. And let me see if I can just find that slide for you real quick here. You can see that these 15 years from the 3rd inch up to the 6.5 inches, or the equivalent thickness of 85 years before that. So basically, these growth rings accelerated in thickness very abruptly, very distinctly, and doubled the diameter of that tree in 15 years, what had taken 85 years to grow. Now, at the time that Mike took this, he was trying to not kill any trees, He was just trying to see if his hunch was. So he took a core sample out, inserted wood back in, sealed it up with caulk. He didn't want to kill the tree. Well, later, a forest fire came through and killed a whole bunch of the trees, and a rodeo Chatta Sky fire. And discovered something very interesting, that had he taken this core sample as a complete cross-section, he would have discovered that the thickened growth rings were on the side of the tree towards where the craft had come down. Very interesting, and you can see that after 15 years or so that the effect kind of faded off a little bit, but still quite pronounced, very directional. The supervisor of this little expedition at that particular time was Ben Hansen. He was the host of the television show Fact or Fake. He also appears in the Travis video that Jennifer made. And he followed up, I found out later, with some research online that the pine trees in the vicinity of the Chernobyl nuclear accident exhibited this same kind of burst of growth. And they actually did some scientific papers that analyzed the reason that this would happen, because, radiation you would expect would cause living things to sicken and die, but for some strange reason, in the case of at least pine trees, that the response is this thickening of the growth rings, whether that's some kind of scar tissue or something. It got into, I didn't really study the phenomena out, but it's counterintuitive, but in the case of the growth ring at the site, it was directional. At Chernobyl, it was, the radiation was just diffuse all around the area, but it does document that radiation causes thickened growth rings. And in addition to that, there is I mentioned the radiation readings that were taken at the site during the search. And the night that I was returned, I ran down into the town. There was a building there with lights on and smoke coming out of the chimney. I pounded on the door and screamed, and nobody came. Doesn't mean nobody heard me. I mean, I must have been terrifying to hear somebody screaming in the middle of the night, pounding. What could this be? But I ran on down, across the second bridge, came to these phone booths. I went into the first one, and it was out of order. But I went into the next one, and I called my family, and they came and got me. Now, this kind of illustrates people's human nature, that the desire to be involved and be a part of something complex, big time, that's in the media and the news. There was a friend of mine that he was a supporter of mine, but what he was claiming was that when I came to that phone booth, first thing I did was call him. He wasn't home, so then I called my family. Well, I mean, this was a friend, but he wasn't anybody that I would think, boy, that's who I need to get help from right away. I did not call him, and the proof is that the operator listened in on the phone call and called the sheriff. It used to be back in the early days, back before the two-way radios were all that accurate, that the sheriff, I think maybe his wife was a telephone operator, but there was some kind of a signaling system that they had worked out with lights up on the hill or something to where the operator was communicating with the sheriff. And they'd see the light blinking up there, and then they knew to call in. But anyway, the operator listened in on the phone call. There was only one phone call from that phone booth that night. But see, that was another thing. The debunkers were saying I was never in the phone booth. I was off in some other place, and his whole theory is blown apart by the fact that the operator informed the sheriff that I had made the call from that location. They sent deputies over there to take fingerprints and all that. Well, my brother played a major part in this whole thing. He was the one that came and lifted me out of that phone booth and took me to get medical attention and defended me against everything, even though the whole world was, wanted to get me, regardless of how fragile my condition was. He understood that, to be grilled by the sheriff or the media at that time would have killed me. And so he protected me from that, and it cost him dearly. You know, he was a farrier, a horseshoer at the time, and all of his customers were rednecks who took a very dim view of this whole UFO thing. And so he had been contacted by the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. At the time, the oldest and largest UFO research organization. They were headquartered in Tucson, but they had some real medical doctors. I described the other guy that claimed he was going to be able to help and couldn't, and so got hooked up with APRO, and they actually had real doctors in their Phoenix membership who actually came and did house calls. They came to my brother's house, did medical exams there, and then followed up with in-office testing and a number of kinds of tests that, you know, doctors don't normally have in their own offices. But Dr. Harder performed the regressive hypnosis, and that was a major step forward with me, because just the ability to relax hypnotically was a huge step forward. Up until then, I actually couldn't even finish a sentence. You know, when the sheriff came to interview me, and everything I told my brother was pretty broken up. It was just fragmented bits of speech. Like I said, I could hardly finish a sentence. Eventually, Dr. Leo Sprinkle came in. He was head of counseling and testing at the University of Wyoming at the time, but he reviewed a number of the psychiatric tests that were given me at the time, because this was to offset the theory that I'd experienced a transitory psychosis. I was passing a lie detector test because I was delusional, believed this had happened, and it didn't really happen, so they had to prove that I wasn't having psychotic delusions. Well, again, this whole theory about psychosis and hallucinations just refuses to take into consideration that 7 people don't experience identical hallucinations. And but so the testing was done, and of course it was a totally normal pattern of scores. I was interviewed by Dr. Jalen Hynek. You know, he was major consultant with Project Blue Book for the Air Force, and he came, interviewed me, and released his opinion the next day that I had been subject to some unfounded allegations, to put it mildly. But what really was great was this document obtained through the Freedom of Information Act on Philip Klass, the primary UFO debunker of the day. And this is a memo from J. Edgar Hoover himself to the director of the CIA. Now today, the CIA is so secret. I mean, back then it was so secret that they wouldn't even put his name in an internal memo. This is from J. Edgar Hoover himself to the director of the CIA. So all they said is to Director of Central Intelligence Agency. Today you can see the CIA director on television, you know, being interviewed. There's much more secret organizations beyond him. But at that time, these memos with their redacted sections in regards to this UFO debunker. There's quite a bit of reference to Aviation Week. In which he is attacking Jalen Hynek. And Philip Klass actually sent letters to the government of Canada to try to discredit Stanton Friedman when he heard that Stan Friedman had moved to Canada. So he was very, very concerned with discrediting people, anybody in connection with ufology. And these documents in this Freedom of Information Act file have quotes. This is the FBI judging that this debunker was not to be trusted in the future. It says it is recommended that the Bureau, FBI, be most circumspect in any future contacts with him. Basically, he was attacking the FBI for using Jan Hynek as a consultant when they have UFO reports. You know, how do you handle these sorts of things, you know? What kind of information you're looking for, you know, what kind of data you be collecting. And basically, Philip Klass was telling him, you know, you guys are, you know, discrediting yourself. You're making yourselves to be a bunch of fools to even discuss this. There's just no such thing in the first place. But some of the things that they were saying in view of his class's intemperate criticisms and often irrational statements he made in support of them, it's recommended that the Bureau be most circumspect in any future contacts with him. Because basically, he was out to discredit the FBI just because they were, you know, trying to handle, you know, UFO reports in a responsible way. But this third to the last quotation from Butte Files discloses that Klass has from time to time come to attention by virtue of the fact that he has been in, and then they redacted 9 lines. That's a lot that's left out there. But the real suspicious thing is what's left behind. And not to be of assistance to his government. That was where this next thing, classified information published by Klass, could not be declassified for purposes of prosecution. No action was taken. The last one, maintaining this case in RUC status. Basically, what this says is that they have standard FBI recruiting, CIA recruiting tactic. Get something on somebody, he was revealing classified information, and then use them to do their bidding. And that's where the $10,000 was coming from. Philip Klass sent an offer to Steve Pierce, the youngest guy on the crew, a $10,000 bribe offer. We'll give you $10,000 if you will go public and say that this never happened. Well, Steve said he went to his wife and says, you know, I'm thinking about taking the money, $10,000. That's a nice chunk of money. And his wife says, well, you say it was true, right? And he goes, oh yeah, I just want the money. And so Mike heard that Steve was considering taking the bribe, and he said, if you would do that, even though you know it really happened and would do it just for the money, then you'll spend the money alone and you'll be bruised. So Philip Klass took that quotation and published it, but he altered it. He took the middle out of the sentence. And so he has Mike threatening Steve against taking the bribe and left out the middle of the part, even though you know it really happened and would do it just for the money. Just actually took the middle out of the sentence and put 3 dots in its place. That's how dishonest Philip Klass was in his sneaky kind of reporting, trying to make people think that Mike was trying to keep Steve from confessing instead of, you know, just making up a story to get the bribe money. And to say nothing of the fact that the bribe is pretty deceitful. Week before last, the deputy Jim Click, that brought the bribe offer to Steve Pierce, came to me at the Disclosure Con, and she said, I used to be married to him, and yeah, he's that kind of a rat fink. I didn't think he was such a rat fink. He was just carrying a message, but She said, yeah, I remember that, and yeah, he was the one who carried the bribe offer to Steve. And so, that was something that this debunker could not deny. I mean, there it was. It's a matter of history, He was basically guilty of trying to falsify the evidence that he was bringing to the public to try to make people believe that these things don't happen, that we were all lying. So he kept attacking our polygraph test to the point where we said, okay, we'll just start fresh. We'll just do it all over again. We'll all be retested. But here's the challenge. We'll pay for the new tests if we fail. If we pass, you pay for them. So, he wound up weaseling out of it. He wanted nothing to do with any real tests. But he was even attacking the state police polygraph examiner. It was ridiculous how vicious he got in his attacks. But in my view, the fact that he was on the payroll of the CIA, Philip Glass did not have $10,000 to give Steve. He didn't make that kind of money. But CIA has a bankroll for that kind of manipulation. It was pretty common stuff. So we have this anomalous tree growth, phenomenal, and whole analysis of what that amounted to. That even though the tree doubled in diameter because of the radiation, because it's the outer ring, which is bigger than the inner ring, it actually mounted to a mass of wood fiber 36 times the volume that it had been previously. But, lots of coincidences that I thought were kind of interesting. There was some area maps of the area at the time that I was looking at, and I found the area of where our incident happened, and it was Area 51. It's just all kinds of really odd coincidences like that. There's, what is this? What are the odds? I mean, look at all the, there's what, maybe 100 or I don't know, 90 different things, and it's got to be Area 51. And then I'd bring my son with me, my oldest boy, and people say, "Oh, you brought D.B. Sweeney with you," and I go, "Huh?" And then I got to looking, yeah, even though D.B. Sweeney didn't look like me in the movie, he looked like my oldest boy. So I posed him in the crew truck, and he did look phenomenally like D.B. Sweeney. Yeah. And they have the same light blue eyes, which is kind of unusual, I thought that was pretty amazing, the similarity in their appearance. I wanted to talk a little bit about an incident that happened in 2014. There was a MUFON meeting there in Burbank, California. And Tracy Torme was speaking, and Jan Harzan had just recently become the head of MUFON. And they gave a talk, and so I was there for that. And then we headed home. It was me and my youngest son, not the one that was just pictured there. It was actually his birthday, Luke, his birthday, and my girlfriend. And we were driving up the 5 north, going to hit the highway to come back over to Arizona. And we saw these lights coming towards us. And I go, what the heck? Now, this is 2014. And closer it got, wow, there it was, one of these giant black triangles. I'd heard these stories about these things, and I didn't believe anything that big could fly, It was huge. I mean, it might have been a quarter of a mile across. It was gigantic. It was, I was really skeptical that anything that big could fly, but it came right towards us and stopped right over the top of us. And when it stopped, I was surprised at how fast anything in the air could stop. And, you know, airplanes don't stop, so it kind of went like that. There was a light on each point of the triangle, and you see how these ceiling lights or canister lights, they're kind of recessed. The light coming from the points were like that, but I didn't get the impression that they were lights to say, here we are, don't run into us, or anything like that. It was more something, I think that's what holds it up there, you know? It's something to do with the lift. But it turned, the point of the triangle turned 90 degrees, and then it shot off towards the Pacific Ocean. Well, my son was saying, Dad, you want me to pull over and take a picture? I go, no, keep going. You know, and, you know, like Chase was saying, you know, this irrational level of fear. By 1984, you know, I would have expected that I would have gotten over that, you know. But for some reason, here I am saying no, and I really regret not taking a picture. Now, I wouldn't have even reported this. I've tried to stick to only reporting the things I can document, and I don't consider my son and my girlfriend enough documentation. But by the next day, my other son had found a website where about 15 other people had reported seeing this thing. So I want to go back to that website, get some contact information, and see if I can get some people that took a picture at the time. I'd like to open it up to question and answer now. Yeah.
So how long was it that you were gone?
I was missing for 5 days and 6 hours. So you can imagine how intense the suspicion of murder grew over time. And people were more and more terrified that there was a team of murderers on the loose. But the whole idea that something, you know, unknown caused the disappearance of somebody created quite a bit of fear at the time. And no, I don't blame them. You know, it was, but in hindsight, you know, not the worry I thought it was at the time.
Travis, it's been 43 years now, so how's your health?
Well, I was very concerned about my health, and, you know, in the immediate aftermath, my brother made sure that, you know, I had all these medical checkups, you know, x-rays and EEG and EKG, the whole 9 yards, and nothing was discovered. And as time went on, I was kind of amazed at how healthy I was. I didn't want to report anything that I couldn't document, so I waited until I went in and got the printouts from my employers that, you know, could prove that I never called in sick in 40 years. And whether that's as a side effect of having had this medical procedure performed on me, or whether it's just a coincidence, maybe, you know, I've always tried to live a healthy lifestyle and avoid bad habits, but everything works just like it did 50 years ago, so I just consider myself lucky.
Do they have you said you had blood work done. Do they still have any of that forensic samples?
I have the medical results, the conclusions that were written, and the EEG, and even the follow-up EEG and all that kind of stuff. I thought the wording on that brainwave scan was interesting, you know, the pattern that was described. I've been wanting to compare that to somebody that's been electrocuted or hit by lightning, something like that, because I really think that's going to be the key to why they were unable to subdue me telepathically or mind control, whatever you call it.
Did you have any marks or scars?
There was a mark on the inside of my right arm, and boy, the skeptics loved that one. They jumped right on that one. That's a sign he's been shooting drugs, you know. There was one mark, the doctor said, not over any major blood vessel. So you wouldn't be injecting something into your arm unless it was going into a blood vein. And I was not a drug user anyway, and as the medical test proved. See, the blood and urine samples were put through the county medical examiner's drug screen, which is really an arm of the government, the forensic in follow-up on criminal cases and whatnot. So it's the highest level of looking into, yeah.
Travis, some of the pictures depicted the Greys and Nordic in color. Like the three Greys were depicted in red as if they were outfitted, and the Nordics in blue shirt and gray pants. Was that just for the picture, or how do you remember that?
Well, that was the color of their uniforms, but there was no insignia that I saw, nothing, just the fact that they were wearing the same color is all. Huh?
How about the eyes? One of the pictures showed a close-up of the eyes depicting iris pupil. Was that?
Yeah, they did have iris pupil and all that. And I thought, well, Greys are very often depicted with this black covering over their eye, you know, whether that's their actual eye or not, I don't know. But I would think that with an eye that large, that's definitely suggestive of nocturnal, or at least a planet with a very thick atmosphere and low light levels. So it's plausible that they would have some sort of an eye covering similar to sunglasses, and not able to tolerate what we would consider to be normal levels of light. What?
And with all due respect to your medical condition that you endured, you said your head was hit as well as your chest, and then you also said that you could not form sentences. My question is, were you diagnosed with aphasia, A-P-H-A-S-I-A, aphasia?
They didn't call it that. They were mainly just attributing that to psychological trauma, just incredible level of fear that stayed with me for days afterwards.
Say that the strike on your head may have caused...
It certainly could have been. That was a lot of energy. And, you know, I had the theory that because of the lightning strike, I don't know if I mentioned this before, that if the craft somehow attracted lightning because of the electromagnetic or EMF field that surrounds it, perhaps some energy jumped to the craft and then jumped to me. Because when I stood up, my head was the closest thing to the surface of that craft. And so, you know, it could have been just something, the energy went to ground.
Do you feel like that you were released in the same place that you were taken?
No, I was not. I was taken to the town nearest where it happened. And it's curious because they didn't take me to the town where I live. But the town where I live is a wide, shallow, dry lake bed. Centuries ago, was it any place they could have got me close enough to where I could get help, it would have been quite a trek to get me in there to get help. But Heber is located at the juncture of several steep canyons that are kind of cliff-like at the edge. And once that craft was down below the ridge top, they would have been unseen by anybody in most every direction. So it's a pretty major concession to bring me that close to where I can get help without revealing themselves too much.
After they put the gas mask on you or put that thing on you, you had no recollection for the next 5 days?
I don't know whether it was 5 days, you know, whether that particular, I would guess that there was a length of time involved there. But I don't know how much time, I don't know where this conscious period was, beginning, middle, or end. I do think that, I remember, you know, when I woke up, I could feel the cold air coming into my clothing like I hadn't been there too long. Over there?
Do you still have dreams, and do you ever sensed any like telepathic connections since the event at all, that like they've tried to contact you to reveal what their real intention was?
You know, the slides that I showed there representing those eyes, those staring eyes, well, that was a dominant feature of my nightmares for some time after that. And then that kind of faded away. And during the time that I was started doing interviews again, in connection with the movie coming out in the early 90s, I started having dreams involving the human-looking ones more. So I went to Tracy Torme and I said, "What do you think, Tracy? Do you think that memories could be coming back, or do you think it's just on account of me doing all these interviews about it again all of a sudden?" He says, "Oh, it's probably just the interviews." And then here a couple of years ago, I asked him the same question, and he goes, "Oh no, those are probably memories coming back." So he completely reversed his opinion about what those dreams meant. I don't know whether they were just dreams or whether it was memories leaking back through, you know. I think maybe not, because, you know, I think they've been pretty effective at blocking memories, probably grateful for that. Yeah.
First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for coming today. Thoroughly enjoyed your talk. I've been into this probably since I was a teenager and have had a lot of what I call woo-woo experiences. But I'd like to ask you, did they find any implants in you?
No, there was no implants detected. I did have upper body x-rays looking for such things. But I'm actually kind of skeptical about the whole implant thing, that it's not universal. I think that I used to be skeptical that they were even, quote, respecter of persons. You know, people would say, I would move and then it would move kind of that way. And then I'd do this and it would do that. Oh man, they're completely ignoring us. We're like ants on the ground. They're not paying any attention. That's what I used to think. But now I think, you know, when our own government is capable of tracking every one of these, they can actually record every single electronic transmission on the face of this planet, and that's our comparatively primitive technology. The idea that aliens could keep track of 8 billion people is not such a big challenge. Child's play for them. Easy. You know, people who say, you know, I saw him when I was 12 years old and then I saw him when I was 30, and I think, yeah, they know it's you. It's no big deal. I don't know whether they're doing it by DNA or brain waves. Probably something more sophisticated than electronic stuff. But the idea that they, you know, keep track of individual people and subsequent, you know, back then, you know, the idea that you would have more than one sighting was considered something that would cast doubt on your report. Even APRO called them repeaters, and you know, the odds were, they considered UFO sightings to be so random and so rare that if you had more than one, that's a suspicious frequency, you know, an increasing likelihood. But, you know, if, based on initiative on the part of these beings, if they're following certain people, you know, like I say, child's play. Yeah, you.
Have you ever had the feeling that the beings, whether they have reached out to you since then? Telepathically?
Well, that's, you know, like I said, I try to stick to things I can prove, evidence, you know, things I can document. And yeah, and I've become certain of that myself, but I can't prove it, so I'll just leave that one alone, you know.
I was wondering, have you found yourself with sort of like a different talents or different abilities that you didn't have before, or a broadening of your, of course you're going to have a broadening of your mind, but I mean, to a degree that might not be expected of somebody who hasn't had your experience. Like, I became a poet. I'm just wondering if you found yourself with a different ability or talent, something that you didn't have when you were younger.
I've always kind of shied away from that kind of stuff, but yeah, it's hard to measure such things, you know, but I did have an IQ test before and after, and there was a considerable difference, but who knows, you know, it could have been a variation in the author of the test, who knows, you know. I think we're about out of time. I'm going to be here for a little while longer, and we can answer more questions. But thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Thank you.